So this is a tutorial on how to make a door and how to make it open at various stages. So what we're going to do is, with a project with the starter content, what we're going to do is make a blueprint class. So when we click on this, it'll come up with this menu here. What we need to click on is the actor. Okay, so the others have different purposes, but for something like a door or like a pickup or something that isn't directly controllable by the character, you need to make an actor. So let's click actor. So we can name this whatever we'd like. So the general industry terms would be BP, so that stands for blueprint, and then underscore, and then whatever you want the name as. So this isn't too important, but this allows us to name it something that makes sense so we can reference it later on. So if we call it BP door, that would be generally what is industry standard. So press enter on that, confirm it, and you should see something like this in a folder. So if we double click that, it will bring up this blueprint window. Okay, so it'll come up with the viewport first. So this is where we need to do a couple of things. So what we need to do, in the top left, this add button. What we need to do is add the static mesh of a door. So with the starter content, in here, in props, there's a few meshes that you can use. So what we'd want to do is use this SM underscore door. So SM stands for static mesh. So again, as I said before with the BP, industry standard is to give the file name or the file format, put that as initials at the front, just so it's easier and stays in a certain order in the file structure. So we need to get SM underscore door. So we can drag it in, we can do this and drag it in and it will work like that. Or what we can do is add, and then, so this is currently selected, so if we unselect that, so if we go to add, then static mesh here, but we can also search. So if you're looking for something more specific than the common stuff, you can search specifically. So when you press add, it'll open up a text field that you can just start to type in. So static mesh, and we want to do the one that just says static mesh. Okay, so with that in, we can rename that, but let's just leave it as static mesh for now, just to make it easier. So if we select this and then go to the right, you can see static mesh and it's currently set to none. So that means that the static mesh has nothing there at the moment. What we need to do, click this, search door, and it'll come up with everything that has a door in the name of it. So we want this SM underscore door, so the one that we dragged in just before. So when we click that, we'll get this door here. Okay, so we've got the mesh now that we need to work with. So what we need to do is click default scene root. So if we do this static mesh and we do what we're going to do next, it will make the thing that we put in what's called a child of this static mesh. So I'll just show you what it does. So if we put this in, move it up to around the middle, so I won't scale it just yet, I'll show you what it does. So let's say we have this door working and this box, which is what's going to detect if the player's near the door. If we then start to open the door, so if we rotate this now, the box will rotate with the door, which is obviously not what we want. So what we need to do is make this box collision a child of the default scene root, not a child of the static mesh. So let's delete that. So select default scene root and then search collision. So if we search collision, you'll see three things: box collision, capsule collision, sphere collision. What we want for this is a box collision. So it'll spawn what I just put in. So then what we want to do, move this box collision to around the middle of the door. And then we just need to start to scale this. So it doesn't need to be perfect, we can always come back to this and fix any issues that we see. But for now, around the same size as the door, and then on the red axis, so the X, we want it quite a bit wider. So dependent on how wide this X axis is, depends on how close the player needs to be for the door to then open. So let's put this to around here, so we need to get fairly close to the door for the door to then open. Okay, so once we've done this, that's all we need to do for the viewport. So we're done in here. So as long as it looks like this, it should all be fine. So next we want to go to the event graph. Once we're here, you'll see a few grayed out nodes. We don't need to worry about them. So I'm just going to drag and select these and just press delete. So from here, what we want to do is when the player is within this box, do something. So the way to do that, select the box. So we know that the box is this. You can name this something different. So I sometimes call this player detect. But again, you can just leave it as its default name. As long as you know that the thing that we called box is the right thing, then that's fine. But I sometimes call it player detect. So then, select that in the event graph. So from here, go to the event graph, select the player detect or the box collision, and then on the details panel on the right, if you scroll all the way down to the bottom, you can see green pluses. So these add events which will trigger something in the code to happen when these criteria are met. So all of these you probably won't need to worry about. The two that you do need to put in is begin overlap and end overlap. So begin overlap is when the player enters the box, so starts to overlap the box, fire an event, and when the player leaves this box, so stops the overlap, do another event. Okay, so we need to press the green plus, select the player detect again, press the green plus on both begin and end overlap. So from this, we want to be able to detect, is it the player that is in this box? So the way to do that is this here. So if we left click on the circles on the output nodes, so other actor, you can see this here, output node. So if we hold left click and drag off it, you can see this node. So if we let go anywhere, we can start to search something. So what we want to be able to do is be able to ask, is the other actor the player? So on my project, I have imported the third person template. So with this, I know that if we go into here, we can see that the player is called BP underscore third person character. So I know that the other actor, when it's the player, so we want to be able to detect when it's the player, is called BP underscore third person character. So what we want to do, we want to cast. So a cast is essentially one blueprint talking to another. So what we can do, search cast, because that's a keyword. We just need to search keywords for these nodes. So search cast, and space, then character, because I know one of the words in the BP underscore third person character is character. So it might be if you've put the first person template in, it'll be called first person character. So all we need to do, click the one that we know is the exact name of the character that we have. So in my case, it's third person character. So cast to third person character. This will now check the begin overlap to see if it is the third person character that has been that has entered the box. So all we need to do, Control C, Control V, or you can drag off the other actor again and search the same thing, and then link that up. So it should be, you have begin overlap, end overlap, and then these two casts. So then from here, this begin overlap will speak to the other actor and ask, is it third person character? If it is, it'll go off of this top one, and if it's not, so if it's anything else other than the third person character, it'll cast failed. So we don't need to worry about that. What we want to do is drag off this. So we need something for it to drag into. So what we want to do, so for this door, we're going to make it where when you press a certain button, it will open the door. So what we need to do is make a variable of if the player can open the door. So on the left, near the middle, you can see a drop down for variables. Okay, it'll have references to some of the stuff already in the actor. What we want to do, we need to press this plus. This will then make a new variable, which is by default a boolean, which is what we want. So a boolean is a true and false statement, or true or false statement. So I'm going to call this can open. So usually in booleans, you write in the form of a question. So can open question mark, but you don't need to put the question mark. So can open, if you are overlapping the box for the door, set can open to true. Okay, so what we need to do, hold left click, drag it in. You'll get this pop up for get and set. What we want to do is set for now. So when you're overlapping the box, and it is the third person character, so it is you that is overlapping the box, set true to can you open the door. And then on the end overlap, set it so you can't open the door anymore. So when you're far away from the door, you can't open it. So now with this, we've got it where it detects if the player is by the door. Now we need to do it so when we press a button, then it goes through a line of code to then animate the door opening. So there's an optimized way of doing input, which I'm going to show you now. So if we go at the top here, so where file, edit, asset, all that stuff is, we want to click edit. And then we want to click project settings. This is where we can change lots of different things in the project, and this is also where we put input. So if you click, so scroll a little bit down, and on the engine drop down, you'll see input here. So then we want to drop down, so we'll want for the action mapping, but you can see there's already some controls here if you put in a template. So third person character, first person character, it'll import these inputs as well. So there's already some made. So as you can see, the reason why we want to make an input here and not just put an input into the code is that you can have, for the one input, you can have multiple different ways of controlling it. So for instance, this jump here has spacebar and also the face button bottom on a gamepad, which usually is A or X on a PlayStation controller. So you can add various different inputs. So what we're going to do, press the plus on action mapping and then type what you think you should call opening a door. So usually in a game, it's E or F, and that's usually the interact button. So what I'm going to do is name that interact. Now with this, if you press this keyboard icon here, you press that until it's glowing up like yellowy. If you press a button then, it will then record that button as what you want to be pressed. So for instance, I'm going to press E, and there we are. It's got E as the button that needs to be pressed for interact. You can do that for many other things, so you can press F, space, enter, but what I'm going to do is do E. E or F is usually the most common one for PC controls. So once we've done that, that's done. We can just cross that off, there's nothing to save. So then if I right click an empty space and I search interact, it'll come up with all these types of things, but it'll say action events. So that's an action input, that's what we want. So you'll see a little arrow, diamond type thing, and the name of the hotkey that I just put in. So if you've done yours as door open, it'll probably be that you need to search door open, but I've done interact. So click that, and then we've got this here. So we can see when we press interact, do something. When we release interact, do another thing. We just want pressed for now. So what we want to do, we need to check if we can open the door. If we can, then go through the code. If not, stop. So what we need to do, drag in can open just like we did for a set, but we want to get a get. Okay, so this gets a reference to what this currently is set to. So if I drag off the output and search branch, this will then bring up a node where if it's true, do something, if it's false, do another thing. So it branches off into two different areas. In common code, this you might be familiar with this called an if statement, okay? But this is a branch in Unreal Engine. So when we press E, so interact, which is E in my case, go to this branch. If you can open the door, do something. So what we need to do, we want to put in a flip-flop. So what a flip-flop does, so it'll make sense once I put the timeline in, but what a flip-flop does, every time the input node of the flip-flop is triggered, go through A, then B, then A, then B. So it flip-flops between A and B. So what we need to do now is add in a timeline. This is going to be the main thing that's going to animate our door. So if we right-click any empty space and search timeline, all one word, it'll automatically select add timeline. So if not, try and find add timeline. It'll have a little clock icon next to it. This is the one that we need. So add that in. And then I'm going to call this door animation. You can just leave that blank, it doesn't matter. But I'm going to call it door animation. So what we want to do now is link up A to play and B to reverse. So this is going to be when you press E, when you're close to the door, open the door, and then close the door the next time you press it. So what we need to do now is double click this timeline. what this does is brings up the timeline interface, which we can then start adding in some animation type graphs. So what we need to do here, press track plus track at the top, and then you'll see a few tracks that you can do. We just want float. So if you click float, it'll come up with something like this. Okay, so it's currently asking us to rename it. It's currently new track underscore 0. We can leave that as it is, it's up to you. But I'm going to call this animation. So we need to add keyframes to this. So what we need to do, you can right click and add a key to this in 2 places. So we need to have 2 keyframes, but the easiest way to do it, hold shift on the keyboard, then just click twice anywhere. Okay, you'll see these 2 diamonds in the level now, in the graph now. With this, we need to set the first one, so this first one, we need to set it to perfectly 0 and 0. Oh. So when you do it, you need to type it, then press enter. Sometimes it doesn't fully do it. So make sure this is 0, 0, not close to 0, exactly 0 and 0. Then with this, we need to, so the time is in seconds. So how long do you want it for the door to fully open? I'm just going to put it to 1 second for now. This can be changed at any point, so you don't need to worry about the exact specifics. So the value is the amount of degrees you want it to be rotated at. So if we look at the viewport and go to the static mesh, we can see how much we might want it to open by. So rotation works on a 360 circle, so more often than not, you'll probably want it at 90 degrees. Okay? I know from experience that plus 90 will rotate it towards us, which might not be what we want. If we have the door the other way, it will rotate outwards, but for the case of demonstration, I'm going to do it to minus 90. So it's going to rotate from 0 to minus 90 outwards. So if we go back to the timeline, if we put this and put the value at minus 90, so currently it looks like the keyframes disappeared. That's because it's currently scaled to a very small number. So you can see here on the graph, it's from 0 to minus and plus 0.5 on the value. We want this because it's currently at 90, so that's quite a bit bigger. So if we press these buttons here, so both of them, it will then scale the graph to fit the keyframes in. So when a human opens a door, they start to open it slowly, then it goes a bit quicker, and then it slows down near to the end. So a way to replicate this is to have this smoothed. So the way to do that, drag select both of these keyframes, or you can hold shift and select the keyframes. Be careful not to add any more keyframes if you are pressing shift. So with this, you can right click and then right click one of the keyframes, not an empty space, so one of the keyframes, and press auto. This will then make it smooth. From this, we can currently see there's a light grey area with the dark grey here, but light grey. So currently, this will cause an issue with the animation. So it'll run through this animation, but still keep going until it reaches this end point. And then when you go to reverse the animation, it'll have to go all the way through here, then it'll start the animation. So currently, it's set to 5 seconds on the length at the top here. We need to set this to the last number, so the last time on the keyframe, on the last keyframe. So currently, I've got this to 1. If you've set it to 2 or 0.5, make sure the time matches the length on the last keyframe. So I'll set that to 1, and now we can see the light grey perfectly encapsulates both of the keyframes. So once we have that, we can close this down. So we can close it just like a Chrome tab. And here we have it, we can see this new float that's been added to animation. Yeah? So once we've got this, we then need to set it up so it actually updates the animation or the rotation of the static mesh. So for this, just like we did for the booleans, dragging them in, we want to get the static mesh because that's the reference to the door. We want to drag in static mesh and just drop it. What that does is gets a reference to the static mesh. Then from here, drag off the output node and search rotation. So with these nodes, you just need to search keywords and it comes up with relevant things specific to what you're dragging off. So this is currently dragging off a static mesh, so this will bring only stuff that can be used for a static mesh. So the one that we don't want to add rotation because that will get exponentially more and more rotated. It's not what we want. We can also get it, but that's not what we want. That just gets a reference. What we want to do is set. So we want to set the rotation from 0 to 90 over time. So set relative rotation keeps it. So I'll show you an example. So we come into the level, put the door in, but we've got a diagonal wall, for instance. So I want to rotate this a little bit. If we do, so I'll go back to here. I search rotation. If we do world rotation, what will happen is when it starts to animate, it'll snap back to this point because this is the world coordinates. So by default, it'll be whatever it snaps into here. So it won't keep this rotation. It'll snap back here, then rotate to 90, rather than adding this rotation in and then doing 90. So what we need to make sure is that we're doing relative rotation. So what we need to do, link this up to update. So every frame that it goes through this curve, every frame, update this rotation to this number. So with this, we've got set relative rotation. It's currently not rotating anything. This is what we need to use to rotate, but currently we can't link this up. But what a rotation is a set of 3 different floats. So an easy way that we can link this up to this is right-click the rotation. So you'll see it has a highlight of lavender. Right-click, split struct pin. What this does is splits it into the individual floats that makes up a rotation. What we can then do is link up this animation to one of these rotation values. So there's an easy way to check this, but I know that it needs to be Z. So the way to check that, click on the static mesh, go to the rotation, and then start to rotate it. So we know that the blue one is what we need to rotate, because that opens like a door then. So then if we look to the right, we can see rotation, then there's red, green, then blue. So that's X, Y, and Z. So we know we want Z to be rotating. So this is the code set up, but there's a few things that we need to do to be able to have it where the player, the input works in this blueprint. So currently, input only works through character blueprints. So input would work through this, okay? But what we need to do is make it so that the input works for the door as well. So there's 2 things that we need to do. The first thing, class defaults at the top, and then scroll until we find auto receive input. So you can search it in the details as well. So search input and it'll come up with everything that is relevant to input. So currently, receive input is disabled by default. So we need to set this to player 0. So it might make sense to put it to player 1, because in games you'd normally be called player 1 as the first player, but in code, things start at 0. So if you have a list of things, it will go from 0 to whatever number. It won't go from 1 to something. So player 0 is the first player. So if we do that, it will then start to receive input, but there's also an issue called consume input. So it's this here, so we need to make sure this is unticked. If we don't do this, and we have multiple doors in the level, the input will only work for one of the doors. So this is because it consumes the input. So it works, as you can see, when you mouse over it, it prevents actors with lower priority from handling this input. So it's essentially a lottery of which one it selects, and it only lets you do input for that. So it eats the input. It doesn't let anything else have the input. So what we need to do is untick consume input, and then all those different doors can be opened with this button. So then if we compile and save that, just to make sure we don't lose it, then this should work. So what we need to do, close that down. That should be done now. So if we play the level, we'll spawn in. If we go up to it, pressing E opens. So I said -90 should work, but it seems like it's opening towards me now. But that's not an issue, because when we're on this side, it will open and close. Okay? So there we have it. We can open and close a door. So one last thing, with the starter content, so if you're wanting to use this starter content, the starter content props, an issue is, for some reason, they don't have collision. So I'm going to show you a quick way on how to add collision to things, just so when you walk in, walk into the door, you're not going straight through it. As you saw me just then, you can walk through this door. So all you need to do, find where the static mesh is, so you can do that through the blueprint. So if you open up the blueprint again, select the door, and then double click on this preview. If you double click that, it opens up the mesh preview. So we can see, so in the show, and then simple collision, there's not currently a collision, so there should be like an outlined box around this door. So there's currently no collision. So where we can do it is click this collision here, or you can click collision at the top, and then add simplified box. So because door is pretty much a box, if we add a box, it does that. So it's currently encapsulating the handle as well, so if you want it perfect, you can scale this collision. So it might be that you want to turn off snapping, so if you click this so it's not highlighted blue, you can do smooth scaling, and now that pretty much encapsulates just the door. So that's it, save that and close that, and then that's done. So if we play this again, we can see you can't walk through the door, and there's issues with cameras and collision, don't worry about that. So we can open and close the door. So we can see if we start spamming E, it does it smoothly. So that's because we did it through play and reverse, rather than play from start and reverse from end. There's some cases where that might be what you need, but for the most case, you'd want to link it up to play, then reverse. So what it does, it plays from 0 to the stopping point, plays through that. If you press it again, it will then start to reverse from that same spot. So it's nice and smooth. So we can start opening and closing the door, as long as you're in the box field. So you can see when we're close to this door, we can open it. When we're close to this door, we can open it. When we're close to this door. But then if I start spamming E away from all of the doors, it doesn't work. So it works locally for each door. And that's how you make a door with controls.